Today we're checking out the Hysolis Apollo 5K, and previously when I reviewed this I got a shock and there was lots of software problems that I reported on, but they have assured me that they have fixed all of those problems and now it's TUV certified, so it shouldn't shock me ever again. That was not fun. Now usually I don't give companies second chances, but everybody including me want this thing to work. Everything that I've requested from the other companies that we have not gotten, this thing has. You can do split phase output, you can do 3-phase output, you can put them in parallel for single phase 120 to run large 120 volt loads. Also, it's expandable more than anyone else, and it has autonomy. If solar power is available with this model, it should be able to turn itself on. And it has a higher PV input voltage than anyone else. So, hopefully it works. If it doesn't, we're all gonna be let down, but man, I really want it to work. So first, let's cover the basic features if you didn't watch my first video. Each unit has 5 kilowatt hours of capacity with lithium iron phosphate cells. And those cells are rated for 6,000 charge cycles. And this battery is expandable to pretty much any size you wish. The maximum capacity is 118 kilowatt hours. Now this unit has an AC charger and it can charge in less than 2 hours with 3,000 watts. But if you connect solar panels, it charges ridiculously fast. This single unit with this single battery can handle 4,400 watts of solar panels at a maximum input voltage of 500 volts. If you compare that to anyone else in the industry, it blows them away. The closest thing to this one is an EcoFlow Delta Pro, and the maximum PV array size is 1,600 watts at 150 volts DC. This thing does way more, okay? It's crazy. And this voltage is very dangerous, so they actually have their own disconnect switch, and everything uses MC4 connectors, so you should never, ever handle a 500 volt conductor. Everything goes through these plugs. And to connect them safely, you just turn this off, and then connect the solar panels, connect it to the unit, and then flip it back on again. Now because the PV input is so large and the voltage is so high, you can actually use this as a stationary system. If you have a ground mount with a single series string, you can now connect it to this unit for a permanent installation. It doesn't have to be mobile, and you can disconnect those panels in seconds and then roll this out your door. They also have a cart so you can wheel it around nice and easy. So yeah, this opens up a lot of options for people like with a cabin or something. You could keep this in your truck, plug it into your cabin, run everything, charge it, and then unplug it in seconds. Next, the inverter is 3,000 watts, but it has a massive surge capacity of 6,000 watts. And I've actually connected it to my car lift and it runs it. No other solar generator on the market can actually do that except for this one. And we're gonna show that in this video. Even the 5,000 watt output Bluetti can't run my car lift, but this 3,000 watt inverter can. So I don't know what they're doing with this inverter. This company has a lot of experience building heavy duty inverters. So yeah, the surge capacity for a high frequency inverter is unreal. And as mentioned earlier, you can put in a split phase configuration if you want to supply a load center for like a cabin's panel, or you can run larger 120 volt loads by putting 2 of these into parallel, or you can do 3-phase. Now if you're designing a large system with this unit, you're gonna have to read the manual to see all of the configurations, because if you put them in parallel for single phase 120 volts, you can put 12 units. If you're doing a split phase, you can only do 6 units, so that would be 18,000 watts maximum. But for single phase 120, the maximum is 36 kilowatts, and double that for the surge capacity, so that's a lot of output. Now in the front of the unit we have a screen, and this is actually removable, and you can turn it on. There's a switch on here somewhere, just like that, and you can control it remotely. So if you're in an RV or a cabin, you can put this somewhere out of the way and you can control it with this. And you can monitor your system. You can see how much power is coming from solar, how much is coming from the grid, or if you're charging from a car's alternator, it also shows that as well. And we can turn on the inverter with this screen, just like that. And you can also turn on the USB ports right here as well. And this comes with the unit. On an EcoFlow, you have to buy it separately. And you can change the settings remotely. And it seems to have an anti-reflective coating because it's really hard to see with this camera, but you get the idea. And it has its own battery, and how you charge it is putting it back on here and then it will charge up. Also on the front, we have the AC output. So if you have a parallel system, you're going to use this RV plug to connect them all together. But for most people, if you have a single unit, you're just going to connect your loads right here. And the 12-volt output is impressive. Not only do we have plugs, but we have Anderson connectors, and we have a cigarette lighter connector. And it has USB fast charge ports, even the USB-C with 100 watts if you want to charge up a laptop. And this cover is removable and it has a filter. That's pretty smart, I like that. Some of the large all-in-ones have this, and this is nice because this does get dirty if you use it all day, every day for months. Now on the back of the unit, we have the main power switch. This turns the unit on. You do not want to flip the switch if the inverter is on and running loads. Next to that, we have an MC4 input. So this is where you connect up to 500 volts. This is where you connect your solar array. And then down here, we have a ground plug. And they actually have a dedicated ground spike that comes with it. And it's sharp, so be very careful. It also comes with the wire. So you just plug this in like that, and you unscrew this, attach the cable, and then stick this into the ground, and you have an actual earth ground. Pretty cool. And then you have two plugs over here to connect the batteries. So when you expand the system's capacity, this is where you do it. Next, we have the AC output communication port. So if you have parallel output, split phase output, or 3-phase output, you're going to use communication cables so that this unit can make that function happen. And then up here we have a 30 amp max AC input for 3000 watt charging. And then over here we have the DC input for cigarette lighter adapter. So if you want to charge from an alternator, you can do it right here with a maximum of 10 amps. Now on the side of the unit, if you remove this cover, you can add or remove the ground neutral bond. So depending on the configuration with the AC output will determine how you're going to have that ground neutral bond. And we'll talk about that more later when I actually set that system up. And that's pretty much it. It's a very simple system. It's still plug and play, but very powerful. You get all the features of an all-in-one, but it's still mobile and easy to use. Now it's time to test the unit. So let's bring it to my workshop and we'll see what it can do. We have two Apollos that we're going to be testing, and we have them on the carts. There's two different types of carts. This is the one that originally came with, and you can have an expansion battery and an Apollo. And this is their new cart, which I thought was a silly idea when they told me, but it's the best. It is so convenient. It has these big knobby tires that can go over cables and bumps, and I love it. You can just move this thing around so much easier with this. And they also changed the colors, and they put the logo on the side. Look at how nice this looks. It kind of matches my EG4 system in the background. Now for the first comparison test, we have an EcoFlow Delta Pro, and this has a 3600 watt inverter. And then we have an AC500, and this has a 5000 watt inverter. And this Apollo only has a 3000 watt inverter. But which one do you think will have the best surge capacity? We're gonna connect an inductive load, which is my car lift. We're gonna see which one can actually run it. And on the car lift, we have a Model 3 standard range. And this is the car lift's hydraulic motor. It's rated for 20 amps, but once it starts moving, it's only like 13 amps. But the initial surge to get it moving is upwards of 80 amps. So we're gonna use a large 10 gauge cable, and we're gonna see what happens when we plug in the solar generators. And this is the ultimate test. This thing is very hard to run. But first, the EcoFlow Delta Pro. Now we're gonna flip the switch and see what happens. Nothing. It didn't even try. Usually it tries a little bit harder than that. That's strange. Usually it spools up for a second, and I want to get that on camera, so let's try one more time. No, it's not. Next up is the AC500, and this has a 5000 watt inverter. So AC500, 2 expansion batteries, and the car lift. Let's see what happens. 5000 watt inverter, nothing else is connected. Let's see what happens. It lifted it. It actually worked. The last time I did that, it did not work. That's incredible. Let's try that one more time. Yeah, it's doing it. Now in my previous test, I was trying to lift up the Model X, and that one couldn't do it. But with the Model 3, it seems to work just fine. So it passed the test. That's amazing. Now let's disconnect one of the expansion batteries and see if it will still work, because now I'm curious. Now AC500 with 1 battery, and it works. Nice. So the AC500 passed the test. That was very impressive. Now the Apollo is only 3,000 watt output, so it's lower than the EcoFlow Delta Pro, and it's almost half the continuous rating of the AC500. So let's see what happens. Now the inverter's on, so let's do the test. 3,000 watt inverter with a hydraulic pump. Let's see what happens. Look at that. It actually works. Now on paper, the EcoFlow Delta Pro should have more surge than the Hysolis Apollo, but in this test, the Apollo actually won. It has less output, but it has more surge capacity. Also, the Hysolis is not connected to an expansion battery. It's just connected to a single unit that has its own battery built in. I tested it right when I got it, and when that car lift turned on, I was like, what? That is crazy. Because previously, none of these solar generators could lift up that car lift, whether it was Model 3 or Model X. But the AC500 can now lift the standard range Model 3. So that's going to be our new test platform. If you can lift a Model X, then you're really winning. Actually, let me switch the cars and we're going to try to lift the Model X with this and we'll see what happens. So now we have the Model X and this thing is very heavy and it's connected to the Apollo. Let's see what happens. No way. No other solar generator has been able to lift up this car, ever. I thought it was gonna fail, I really did. That is crazy! Not even the AC500 can do that. What in the heck? Now nothing in my shop can lift up that Model X except for the Apollo and the 18K. That is it. And the 6500EX, that can actually do it as well. So the AC500 has never been able to lift my Model X, but we're gonna try it one more time just to be fair. It's a different ambient temperature today, different humidity, who knows what. Let's try it just to see if it actually works or not. This is a Model X being lifted by an AC500. And it works! It did not work last time. That's crazy. That's really good. So now we have two solar generators on the market that can lift the Model X. And the last time I tested the AC500, I did it like 5 times with all sorts of configurations and it never lifted this car. But for some reason today, it's lifting it. Now, if you want to learn more about the AC500, I have a full review video that covers everything. I'm not a big fan, and you can see why in the video, but yeah, I don't think many people are gonna buy this regardless. For the final test, the EcoFlow Delta Pro lifting the Model X. But realize I have 6 of these EcoFlow Delta Pros and not a single one has been able to lift up that Model X or the Model 3. So I don't think it's gonna pass. But keep in mind, this is a larger inverter than the Apollo, and the Apollo can lift it. It can lift the Model X and the Model 3. This one can do neither. So let's test it one more try. We'll give it one more shot. EcoFlow Delta Pro lifting the Model X. Nope. That's so unfortunate. It just turned itself on again. So let's try one more time. Yeah, it's doing nothing that time. Wow. Now I need to mention that none of these devices have a surge capacity large enough to run that car lift. And now I'm trying to figure out why it worked this time, but not all the other times. With this AC500, I plugged it into this outlet, and maybe that made a difference, because before I think I plugged it in over here. I'll have to look at those videos again. But yeah, the Apollo's surge capacity is incredible, and you should be able to run any power tool or any type of inductive load that you want. And if you put multiple Apollos in a parallel, you can run like 5-ton air conditioners and other things like that. So yeah, pretty darn impressive. Best in its class, especially for the rating. It's performing like what this one does at almost half the rating. So I've never seen that before in past testing. That's really good. Now we're gonna cover speed charging. Both of these units are connected to my panel with a 240 volt NEMA 1450. And there's settings that you have to change on the screen to enable the fast charge abilities. Now first you wanna connect the AC charging cable. It plugs in right here. And for most people, this 30 amp plug works with an adapter so you can plug this into a wall outlet. So you just put this on right here and you plug it into the wall. The standard settings that come with the unit only charges with 740 watts. So you can easily and safely plug this in and you'll have no issues. But if you want to have fast charge capabilities, you either need to plug this into a 30 amp plug or use an adapter. This is a NEMA 1450 and it goes out to two 30 amp 120 volt plugs down here. And right now we're charging both of these with 3,000 watts each with this adapter, but ensure your conductor size is large enough for this load. Now when you enable fast charge, you can't use the inverter, unfortunately. So each of these is taking in 3000 watts, so the inverter cannot be turned on when it's doing this fast charge. But if you have it in UPS mode and you're charging slower, you can have the inverter on. So let me show you how to enable this fast charge mode so you can charge up the whole battery very quickly. So first click settings. Usually it's on UPS, but you want to click this AC/FC, and then we'll ask how much current it can handle from this source. If you're connected to a wall outlet, you can do 15 amps right here. And let's see how much that gives us. And that's 1700 watts, so that's perfect for a wall outlet. Now let's go back. Now if you have a 30 amp plug, you can use 25 amps. And now it will go up, and there we go, 3000 watts. But you'll notice it says AC off and you can't turn it on. It changes right here. Now let's go back to settings and change it to 15 amps. And we still cannot turn the inverter on. Let's try 5 amps. And now you can turn the inverter on. Okay, that's pretty limited. But most of them are. A lot of them use the inverter circuit in reverse. And yeah, so 5 amps is the only one that you can actually use with the inverter. Actually, let's try UPS mode and see what happens. So this one you can turn the inverter on, but you're limited to 737 watts. So no difference really. Now let's go back to fast charge. We're going to charge it up to 100% before we do our load test. Now everything is fully charged and we're going to do a split phase output. So we have this cable that plugs into the 30 amp and the 30 amp, and then you get a NEMA 1450, and we're going to use this to charge a Tesla. So first we need to add the communication cables. Now every configuration is different, so please read the manual, but for 2 units in split phase output, we're going to use 2 cables. And the cable that goes into the left port is going to go into the left port over here, and then the one on the right is going to go into the right port over here. Next, we're going to change the settings on the screen on both units. So go to settings, and then split phase under parallel mode, and we're going to put P1 on the first inverter, and then go back to home. Now on the second one, go to settings, and then split phase, P2 for the second inverter, and then go back to home. And let's clear these alerts because this shouldn't be here. And now it's good, perfect. Now we're going to turn the inverters on and test for voltage. We're going to go hot to hot, 240 volts, that's great. Now let's go to hot to ground, 120, hot to ground 120, hot to neutral 120, hot to neutral 120. So we have good voltage. We can connect a 240 volt load or a load center. I'm going to connect a Tesla EV charger to this with an extension cable. So this is NEMA 1450, and we're going to plug it in very carefully. Understand that there are exposed conductors and you're better off turning it off. I'm going to put it on the ground with this concrete and then push it in so I don't have any risk of touching these conductors. And guess what? We have an error. And I knew this was going to happen, and that's what the next demonstration is going to be. Now the reason we got the error is because we do not have a ground neutral bond. It is required by the Tesla charger. But with these units, unlike other units on the market, you can add a ground neutral bond in one of the units. So we're going to open this one up and add that bond. So first we're going to turn off the inverter output. I also turned off the power at the AC input, and also there's no solar attached to this model. This is a plastic case. They are not using metal anymore. That's how they got the certification, because they do not want anyone else getting shocked again. Whew, and here it is. And this is a prototype model, by the way. So they said there's electrical tape and other things just randomly in here because they were working on it. But yeah, this is one of the first models. So here's the ground neutral bond. By default, it's on the one that's up here. And this screw is insulated from this piece of metal. So we need to attach this wire to this sheet metal down here. Now we should have a ground neutral bond. So turn the inverters on. You have to tap it like twice to make it turn on. And it's charging. How cool is that? We can do 6,000 watts continuous, which is 25 amps. And there's 25 amps, so let's see how long it can do it for. And it's running 2,800 over here and 2,800 over here. Now we have 20,000 watt hours of capacity. If you divide that by 6, you get 3.3 hours. So we'll come back in 3 hours and see if we discharge to 0. And these things are quiet. It's at the max AC output for both of them, and I can barely hear it. Like my microphone is right next to this thing, and I can barely hear it. It's as quiet as like an Anchor solar generator. That's really nice. So it ran the load for 3.5 hours and it's been charging nonstop. It did not disconnect and we're at 0% state of charge on each unit. Now we're gonna try to turn it on. We're gonna turn on the inverter with solar power alone. They said that this feature is actually working, so we're gonna first hook up solar to this one and then to this one. And that's strange. This one says the inverter's already on, but this one is not. I don't know why it shows that. Let's test for voltage. There's no voltage and it's off. Yeah, there is no potential here. But it says that it's on. They need to fix that. I wonder if these have the same firmware. Let's look it up. They have the same firmware, so it's not that. So I'm pretty confused. I'm not sure why this one says that the inverter's on when it's not on. So we're gonna connect solar, charge up to about 20% for each one, and see if the inverters turn themselves back on. And I'm not sure how it will handle the split phase output. Will it turn on the output when one of them is fully charged? Or does it have to wait until both of them are charged? Because you don't want one of the hots to be live and not the other, so we'll see. I'm actually curious. I have no idea what it's gonna do. And right now I connected 4 400 watt panels, so we have 1600 watts. And it's charging, perfect. And hopefully it can turn itself back on in the split phase configuration. So I learned something new and I made a good mistake that I can share with you guys. Previously, I thought that you have to charge them up individually, but I called them up and I was like, is there any way to connect these together? Because the battery cables are the same. I was like, can you have one battery instead of two separate systems with the split phase output? And they said, yes, you can actually use the blue cable and connect these together. So that means you can charge with solar from one and they will both turn on by themselves. And having the inverter on with one and not on the other means that it's in a search mode and it's waiting to turn on when it gets the signal. So it's supposed to do that. So I'm gonna attach that cable in the back, and it's the blue cable, and you attach the two units with the battery to plug. And I read that whole manual and I missed that. That is my fault. And this is the first split phase output solar generator that can do this. If you use an EcoFlow Delta Pro and you use their double voltage hub, they cannot feed back and forth between the two main units that have the inverters, so this is really useful. This turns it into an actual system. It's a single battery. Well, if it works, let's try it out. And it's showing that it's charging through this one where solar is connected, but I don't see anything over here. So I'll give it a few hours and see if they charge up together. That will be awesome. Imagine having two of these without any expansion batteries. You'd have 10 kilowatt hours in a split phase output system that's mobile with very few cables. That would be really nice. Once this thing turns itself back on again, it will start feeding power into the Model X. And that's what I've always wanted, is an autonomous off-grid solar generator system. You could easily run a cabin in the middle of nowhere and have it turn itself back on when solar power is available. So we'll come back later and see what happens. It's actually on. So this is a new feature and it's actually working. Let's test for voltage. 120, 120, and 240. Perfect. They are working together. They turn themselves on. Only one of them is being charged, but they're sharing one battery. So it actually worked. So that is good news. Let's charge this one up and do a capacity test. We'll see if it can do more than 3,000 watts. I think it can because that surge capacity was insane. So I'm impatient, so I disabled the inverter and we put it on fast charge mode. So we have 3,000 watts coming from that inverter over there, and we have 930 watts coming from the array. And it's handling it just fine. That's almost 4,000 watts. And it's still very quiet. I was wondering about that if you had more solar and fast charging, because so far it's just been super quiet, but it's still super quiet. So that's pretty impressive. Now the unit is fully charged and I disconnected it from the rest of the batteries in the other unit. We're gonna put some large loads on here and see what the max continuous rating is. And this is the hardest test. Most high frequency inverters cannot run these. So here's one heat gun, and heat gun number 2. We're pulling 2,928 watts. Let's run this for a few minutes to ensure that the continuous rating of 3,000 is actually true. So it seems to be running fine with that, so let's add another load. And it doesn't seem to mind that either. Now this one is 443 watts, so I think it will trip it. Uh-oh, 3,390? Yep, that's the limit. And it just turned itself back on. That's good. Now we're gonna charge it up and do a capacity test with this watt-hour counter. By the way, connecting the solar panels with this disconnect switch is very nice. Everyone should do this. This is genius. It makes it safer, easier, there's no arcing, it's perfect. EcoFlow and Anchor, I'm talking to you right now. So none of these loads could do a 0.2 C rate test, so I'm using a battery charger with a regulated and variable output, and we're going to pull exactly 1000 watts through this extension cable. There we go, 990 to 1040. Don't think we can get it better than that, guys. We'll come back in 5 hours and see what the inverter efficiency is and the capacity of this battery. Test is finished, and now we're gonna turn it on so we can see the results. And the results are 4.93 kilowatt hours. So let's divide that by total capacity. 91.7% efficiency. And in the manual, it says the efficiency is 94%. So we almost hit that figure. This doesn't include idle consumption or Wi-Fi or the screen or anything else. That's from the battery to the AC output. And we almost hit it. It was within 2%. I think they should derate it a little bit. I think that they should say that this is a slightly lower capacity. I'll tell them to do that, just so it can hit that figure exactly with a 0.2 C rate test. So after nearly a week of testing the Apollo 5K, I made a list of pros and cons, and we're gonna see if it's actually worth buying. So first, the surge capacity is incredible. Just a single unit without any other expansion batteries, and it can lift a Tesla Model X on my car lift. Pretty much no other solar generator on the market can do that except for the AC500, and that's a 5000 watt continuous inverter with a massive surge capacity, and this thing is performing at that level. It's actually beating other models that have a higher surge rating for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. I think they derated it, but yeah, the surge capacity is insane. Next, the solar input is incredible. Not only is it larger than anyone else in the solar generator space, but it has a max PV input voltage of 500 volts. The competition is at like 60 to 150 volts. So now with 500 volts, you can have a single series string on a ground mounted array in your backyard. So you can actually have a real stationary system. And the single unit can handle 4,400 watts of solar. Everything else is much lower. Even the EcoFlow Delta Pro, it's limited to 1,600 watts. So yeah, the Apollo 5K is again on a completely different level. You can actually use this for a stationary system now. Next, it is beginner friendly, especially for split phase output mode. You can use a couple adapters, you don't have to wire anything up, and you'll have a 120 240 volt output mobile solar generator. But you're not lacking capabilities like the other solar generators available. So it's still beginner friendly, but you can do everything. You can do a 3-phase system, you can do a massive single phase 120 volt system, and it will just run. There's nothing that I did that you guys couldn't figure out or that was difficult. Even the ground neutral bond, very simple. Next thing I liked is the remote screen. I didn't think I was going to use it, but when I was doing the testing, I could change the settings remotely, I could monitor it, I could control it, I could turn the inverter on or off. It was really nice. But the competition does have remote screens, but they don't come with the units. With the Apollo 5K, it comes with it. Next, the expandability is incredible. No matter what size system you're trying to build, you can now build it. The capacity, 118 kilowatt hours is the maximum, and for the output, for a single phase 120, you can do 36,000 watts. So yeah, no one else out there has this capability unless you do a DIY system. So this is the first solar generator that can actually do this. Next, it's the first solar generator that has built-in autonomy. If there's solar power available, it will just work. I finally got it to work on the EcoFlow Delta Pro, but the first one I tried out, I did the updates, it's a newer model, and it did not work. But on the newest EcoFlow Delta Pro I finally got the autonomy to work. But this one is easier. You can also set when it turns itself back on again, whether it's at 10%, 20%, 30%, or even 50% or higher. If you have large loads, it will just drain the battery quickly, and you can now program that and it will control itself automatically. EcoFlow needs to add this to the programming. They finally got it working, but it's not like this. They need to fix that. And it's not hard to do, and it shouldn't be a lab feature. It should be a main feature. It should be on the front screen, and you set it up, and that's it. And it wouldn't be that hard to implement, so hopefully EcoFlow can give us some competition. Next, the cells are rated for 6,000 charge cycles, and for most people with lithium iron phosphate, that's more than enough. That's probably gonna outlive some of us. And yeah, you can still use it past that point. It will just be at a reduced capacity. Next, their wheeled platform with the large tires. I love that thing. I wish everyone else had that. The EcoFlow Delta Pro and the Anchor, they are wheeled, but they have small wheels, and it's really hard to get them over the cables in my workshop or when I'm going around the backyard. With this one, I can take it anywhere in the backyard, off-road or on the concrete, and it will just roll over anything I need it to. Next, it's either mobile or stationary, and I mentioned that a second ago, but that's very important. If you do not want to do a DIY system, but you don't want to be limited in the features and capabilities of your system, this is pretty much the only option you have. So now it's competing with other all-in-ones or other DIY systems. Now, last but not least, it's certified by TUV, and it will not shock you. The first version had a metal case, and through inductance there was potential on the case through the MPPT circuit. So they fixed that. They also have a nylon or plastic case now, and it's been tested by a third party. I'm not going to do reviews now unless it's tested by a third party because I don't want to get shocked. That was very dangerous and that made me very angry. But they did fix it, and I think they actually have a good product now, so we'll see. Now let's move on to the downsides. Now the first downside is the price. It's going to cost more than a DIY system. If you bought a single server rack battery and a 3 kilowatt system from EG4 all in one, you're gonna have a 5,000 watt MPPT, a 3,000 watt output, and then you're gonna have the same battery capacity with pretty much the same charge cycle life. And that system will cost about half as much as an Apollo 5K. But people that want the convenience, and a lot of people do, especially going by EcoFlow sales, and people that want more features and more functionality with a split phase configuration, the Apollo 5K is the only option right now. Now, if all you need is an inverter and a solar charge controller, you might be better off doing a DIY system for cheaper. But if you want all of the other functions, specifically the 12 and 24 volt alternator charging, that would be an extra cost in a DIY system to buy that converter. Also, AC chargers are not cheap, especially a 3,000 watt AC charger. Also, having a remote screen that you can control the system and having the app functionality, you're not going to get that with the cheaper DIY systems unless you actually add that for more money. And if you do that through Victron, it's going to cost a lot of money, but it really depends on who you're going through and what size system you have. If you need that added functionality, it's very important to consider that with your cost analysis. Some of you guys will be a lot better off with a plug and play system. But if you compare the Apollo 5K to other solar generators on the market, I think it's a bargain. And there's nothing else out there that can compete. There's nothing with a 500 volt input with 4,400 watts of solar, or the surge capacity, or any of the other features like the split phase output with the ground neutral bond on one unit. No one else has that. And the individual units have more capacity, especially compared to an EcoFlow Delta Pro. Those are 3,600 watt hours. This thing is over 5,000 watt hours. So for the money compared to other similar products, it's better. And hopefully this incentivizes the competition to make something better. We've been asking for a long time, and this is the first one with, like, for example, the 500 volt input. You could easily add a disconnect switch and use MC4s like they're doing, and easily add that massive single series string capability. But yeah, no one else has, and I don't know why. Next downside is if you're building a large system, I don't think the Apollo 5K is the right way to go. Think about this for a second. Imagine if you have 4 Apollo 5Ks in a split phase configuration. Think about wiring up those AC outputs to a load center. And then you're going to have to think about how to stack those expansion batteries and how to cable everything so it actually looks nice. Having 4 separate units with their own expansion batteries and then wiring everything together, that's going to be kind of difficult. But instead, you could do DIY. Now compare 4 Apollo 5K units in split phase configuration versus a single 18K unit from EG4. You slap it on your wall, you put a Power Pro battery battery below it, you install it in less than an hour, you connect the cables, you have all the MPPTs with a piece of conduit, and you're done. It's cheaper, the complexity is lower, and it takes probably about the same amount of time to install the thing. So if you're building a large system, I wouldn't recommend the Apollo 5K. It's just more difficult. You're better off going with a DIY system. And the DIY systems are pretty much plug and play at this point. They have Amphenol connectors, and you can pretty much set that thing up in less than an hour. But on a DIY system, you still have to wire the AC output to a load center. If you are a beginner and you do not want to touch any of those cables, and you just want to use the adapters to run an EV charger or something, and you still want all the features of an all-in-one, the Apollo 5K is for you. But just understand, the larger the system, the more likely you are better off with a DIY system instead. Next downside is the PV input minimum voltage is 120 volts. And that's very common across the industry for all-in-ones, but it's not common for solar generators. If you have an EcoFlow Delta Pro or an Anchor, you can connect 20 volts, 40 volts, 50 volts. It does not care. It will start charging with that lower voltage, but not with the Apollo 5K. You're going to have to put multiple solar panels in the series until it's at least 120 volts. So for most residential size panels, I would say a minimum is 4 panels in series. Anything smaller than that and you're risking too low of a voltage. Personally, I would keep it above 200 volts minimum. So yeah, that's quite a few panels. So if your system is that small, the Apollo 5K is probably not a good idea. Next downside is the form factor for large systems. If you are building the maximum capacity Apollo 5K system that can go up to 118 kilowatt hours, and you have 4 of those things in parallel with the split phase output, that is a lot of expansion batteries. They're very heavy, and to make it look nice, you're gonna have to stack them up on some shelves or something. You're gonna have all of these cables in the back, and it's gonna be very messy, and it's gonna take up a lot of room. The best way they could fix this is with larger expansion battery options. Instead of having only a single expansion battery for 5 kilowatt hours, they should have a 15 kilowatt hour, like a trophy battery or a Power Pro battery from EG4. Also, they could clean up those cables with a different type of plug. Instead of having them stick out and making a big bend, just like an EcoFlow Delta Pro, they need to have a 90-degree angle so that they can connect and then be pushed up against a wall. Because all the solar generators right now are like that. They have a big cable and it sticks out. Even on the Anchor, even on the Bluettis, pretty much everything has this big ugly cable. They need to have 90-degree adapters where they just plug in and then they conform next to the unit. Instead of having all these messy wires everywhere, it just looks awful. Next, the screen annoys me. I do not like the screen. It is hard to tap the buttons, and the inverter on and off button needs to be bigger. There's lots of space around it, and they need to make it easier to press, because usually it takes me 2 or 3 times to press that stupid thing, and I don't like that. So hopefully they'll have a firmware update to fix that. Next, it's a new product, so who knows what the long-term reliability is like. Even though it's rated for 6,000 charge cycles, these things might break in 6 months or something. So if you're trying to build a large system, I would say forget it. I think the Apollo 5K is perfect for a mobile system for now and to see how well it works, but how it shines is with like 2 units and 2 expansion batteries. You have a split phase output, you can use easy RV adapters, and anybody can hook it up. And the power capabilities are incredible. You have a massive surge, you'll have 8,800 watts of solar input, and yeah, it has all the features that you need. And even 2 Apollo 5K units all by themselves is 10 kilowatt hours and very powerful. Even the surge capacity without expansion batteries is incredible. So yeah, that's where I think the Apollo 5K shines, and it destroys everything else out there, especially compared to solar generators. But for building a large system, I personally wouldn't do it. It would cost a lot of money and it would be very ugly with lots of cables. So for large systems, you should still stick to DIY, but 2 Apollo 5Ks would be really nice. That is really cool, and I'm glad they built it. It has all the features and functionality that we need. So let me know if you think I'm missing anything. It took me quite a few days to make this video, but I think I covered everything. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. I'll have links below for the Apollo. It might sell out, it might not. I'm not actually sure what inventory they have, but I think it's going to be a pretty successful unit, especially compared to an EcoFlow. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.